Hey everyone, this is Tim, aka Pirate Tom.
Hey, this is Dane, aka Cheesy Danish.
And this is episode 5 of Was It Worth It, brought to you by SharcTank.com. Was It Worth It is a part podcast, part review show where a couple jive turkeys play a cheap indie game, and in lieu of giving it a score rating, we will talk about our personal experiences with the game and say whether or not it was worth the money that we paid.
Yeah, generally the games that we pick, they're going to be indie games, so $15 or less.
So which game did we play this week?
This week we played Contrast. Contrast was developed by Compulsion Games and published by Focus Home Interactive. It retails on Steam for $14.99, although there's also a collector's edition that retails for $19.99, which includes the original soundtrack, as well as some artwork and a developer diary. Contrast is a three-dimensional puzzle platformer, or is it a two-dimensional side-scrolling puzzle platformer? Alright, for that to make sense, I'll get into the story a little bit. The game is set somewhere in the US in the 1920s, and there are two main characters, Dee Dee, a brave and capable little girl with a dysfunctional family.
Too capable, if you ask me.
Yeah, I know, she's kind of a superhuman little girl. And Dawn, a mysterious silent acrobat who can only be seen by Dee Dee. Now, Dawn has the ability to become a shadow on well-lit walls, which is the mechanic behind almost all of the puzzles in the game, hence the 2D side-scrolling. Throughout the game, Dee Dee's sneaking around the city in an effort to find out about her parents' failing relationship and to hopefully do what it takes to make things right for them. And throughout all of this, you follow her as Dawn and use your shadow powers to assist her, almost like a guardian angel, ironically. Now, in previous episodes, we've kind of made it a point while breaking down each aspect of the game to mention favorite things first, or at least I have, and then we kind of discuss each of those things. I'm going to mix it up this time around and bring up my least favorite game aspects first, starting with the sheer lack of polish. There really isn't a better way to put it. This game is incredibly unpolished. The sad thing is, I'm not really that surprised, because the stylized graphics, large three-dimensional worlds, and shadowy side-scrolling segments looked incredible in the trailer, and during the displays of the game at this year's game conventions, which actually won Contrast various Best in Show awards. So when we saw the game was only going to be $15, I was shocked and became pretty skeptical, apparently for a good reason, as we'll get into.
Yeah, I saw it at PAX this year, and I was really impressed by the way it looks. I expected it to be a lot higher in price than $15, but yeah, like Dane just said, it's the lack of polish is embarrassing. If I was the developer, if I was Compulsion Games, I would be embarrassed to have put this game out. To
release such a buggy product. Well, before we go into why it's so buggy, there is one thing that I read about online. Apparently, since it was actually a launch game for the PlayStation 4, among the other platforms that it was made for and released on, it's possible that it was completely rushed so that way it could get a multi-platform release at the same time, but also be released on the same day as the PlayStation 4. So, you know, that actually might be the answer for why it's so glitchy.
I kind of figured that was the case when I saw that it was, slated to release with the PS4.
Right.
I figured that would have been the reason why it was rushed. But
Which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, but I mean, like, even among games that are notably rushed, like, this game was beyond just rushed. It was just, it was bad.
Yeah, unfortunately. The biggest issue is that the game is riddled with glitches. There were times where I tried to phase out of the shadows and actually went completely through the wall, bringing me into a glitched out, untextured world and eventually plummeting me through the floor to my death. There were other times where a key element to a puzzle, like a movable spear or a box, would completely disappear from the game, and the only way to get it back was to pause the game and select Reload Last Save, which was made so much worse by the fact that the game sort of arbitrarily chooses where and when to autosave, and every single time I reloaded a save, whether it was because of a glitch or whether I had just, quit the game and loaded it back up some other time, I had to replay several minutes of gameplay just to get back to where I was.
Yeah, I pretty much had the same experience. I mean, it's not just like there were glitches, it's that there were game-breaking glitches. And it's not even just the glitches. Some of the aspects, just the mechanics of the game were so unpolished that there were parts that were just harder than they should have been because the mechanics were so bad. And then if that glitched out on you on top of that, it was just even more frustrating.
Yeah, a sandwich of bad things.
Yeah, insult to injury, as they say.
So yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, on top of just the glitches, there were poor mechanics. The major one would be the controls. They were simple enough on paper. You run around, you jump, you press a button to become a shadow on the wall, you press a button to do a short mid-air dash. But man, it was just frustrating and unresponsive. For instance, during puzzles where I'd be tasked with jumping to a wall and quickly becoming a shadow, I'd be mashing the button, but it just wouldn't work in time, and I'd plummet to my death.
Or what happened to me in those cases, I'm mashing the button and I go into the shadow, and because I'm mashing the button, I pop right back out.
Right, you're kind of forced to hit it more times than you needed to because the first couple times you tried didn't work.
And then that ends up backfiring because you're just forcing yourself back out.
Yeah, that happened to me. Also, there were so many times where the game arbitrarily required me to approach surfaces or items from a very specific angle before it would actually let me interact with them. I guess that technically falls into the glitchiness category as opposed to, mechanics or controls, but it was directly related to non-responsive button presses, so in a way, the bugs are directly responsible for the controls being bad most of the time.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Also, despite the fact that the aesthetics of the world were actually quite nice, fitting the 1920s urban American theme almost perfectly, everything felt sort of hollow at the same time, in my opinion at least. When you're exploring the three-dimensional areas, your character Dawn just feels really weightless and, I don't know, fidgety.
Yeah, there's really awkward physics. It's like your character doesn't have any inertia at all, so it's like you immediately accelerate to full speed, and it's just, everything just feels kind of off. Yeah. And I agree that the world feels hollow also because your character can only be seen by Dee Dee. You also can only see Dee Dee except the shadows of other people. So this world that should be populated by people is empty. It's barren.
Yeah, and there are story reasons for that. I guess there's a little more explanation towards the end, and I mean, I'm not going to go into it because it's kind of spoilery. I guess I was thinking about mentioning that, the fact that it is empty, there's no other people there to interact with, and on one hand, I mean, that's the way it is. That does make it feel kind of empty and lonely. On the other hand, there is kind of a story reason for it, so it's hard to, I don't know, I'm just kind of meh on that.
Yeah, honestly, I think it was by design, though. I almost
feel like... no, I mean, it's
like...
kind of an excuse, like, oh, well, she exists in the shadows, so she doesn't see other people, so we don't have to actually... render other human beings,
Well, I was wondering if that's the case, or I was wondering if it's a metaphor, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, when you're in darkness, you feel alone, that type of thing. Like, when you're in a dark time in your life, you feel more lonely than, you know what I mean? Like the lack of... Even though your life circumstances may be not different than any other time, just because you are in a dark place, you feel more alone.
Or even though there are people all around you, you could... be around tons and tons of people every day, going to school, going to work, but they may as well not be there.
Right. And like I'm saying...
yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, I think there's a reason for it, but it does make the world just feel empty.
And that's what I was saying, even though there's reason for it, it still kind of sucks sometimes, I guess. But gosh, we were talking about the physics and how they're fidgety, or you mentioned, you described it much better than I did, how there's no inertia. Well, that definitely contributed to how tough it could be to complete some of the high reflex tasks of merging in and out of the walls when the game was also glitching it up at the same time. She does control a lot better when you're actually a shadow on the wall and you're doing some of the side-scrolling things, but there aren't really that many times where you're side-scrolling for longer than a few seconds. Although, thinking about that, I would like to mention that, in my opinion, the most memorable part of the game is this puppet theater sequence where you're in the middle of a circus, you're a shadow, and you're on sort of the projector screen, and you're playing the lead role of this puppet show. The entirety of that segment is a side-scrolling platformer, which, thanks to the shadowy aesthetic, feels strongly influenced by the game Limbo. While it isn't perfect, there's a lot to like about it. I mean, I really enjoyed it. It was the story of like a princess that has to save a knight over and over again. I don't really want to give too much away, but I liked that it paralleled the events of the game story and reinforced the strong female leads of the game, which you just don't see nowadays, or very often with video games.
Yeah, I at the risk of sounding misogynistic, that it was actually kind of that kind of pulled me out of the atmosphere because of how different society was back then. Like, strong female leads didn't exist in that time period, you know what I mean?
I didn't even think about that. I didn't even consider the fact that in the 20s that wouldn't have made sense at all to do that. I was just thinking, oh hey, sitting right here, in 2013 playing this game and seeing that message is really cool. Yeah, so that's actually a good point. I don't think that really makes you sound misogynistic. I mean, I think that's
Yeah, it's just, society was different back then.
Right. But still, I mean, I think I would rather have that message in the game.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, that's...
But no, that's a good point.
Obviously, that's a strong theme within the game. So.
For sure. Yeah, the entire game, really, yeah. And you know, that's a really good lead-in to talk about the story itself. While the game is unfortunately really short at barely 4 hours in length, the short little story that you get to experience is really good, in my opinion. The beginning premise is very simple. The young girl Dee Dee's parents have split up, her mother Kat works nights singing at a local club, and her father Johnny's off scheming up a way to bring in some money for his family, both because of his duties as a father and in hope of Kat actually taking him back. Unfortunately, he gets involved with the mob when he takes a large investment from them so he can start up that circus I was talking about. There's also a mysterious magician who Johnny attempts to book as the main attraction for his circus, and he just might be more important than you initially realize. I have to say, the way things wrap up at the end of the game is really interesting and enjoyable for the most part, even if it felt a little rushed, in my opinion. I also really liked that the little optional collectibles that are scattered throughout the game, like newspaper clippings or photos with writing on them, they do a really good job filling in certain details about the characters or their lives.
Yeah, and they do a good job of giving you clues because, you know, there's kind of a reveal at the ending, but it's not really if you pay attention to the collectibles because it kind of, you're almost told everything. It just kind of, it confirms what you're already expecting about the characters. One thing that I want to say about the game is, or the story itself is, I feel like the story was exceptionally good, especially with a lot of things in this area because, I don't know, I kind of have a personal beef with a lot of storytelling in this day and age. I feel like a lot of the stories that are popular in movies or books or anything these days are the ones that are darker and edgier. You know, they don't have that Disney feel because it's more realistic to be darker or, you know, that kind of thing. And they chose not to go that route with this game.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, hopefully that doesn't give anything away for listeners who may have been expecting something different, but I do agree with you, for sure.
To me, the story, it made me feel good.
Which is especially welcome, considering the game stylistically resembles BioShock Infinite, in my opinion. And, well, I guess I won't give anything away for that either, just in case anybody hasn't played it, but, you know, it's kind of the opposite of what you were just saying with the Disney ending.
Yeah, and it, you know, that's another thing, is it's not only dark and edgy that today's writers try to be, it's also really thought-provoking, which is what BioShock Infinite decided to do, and it was a bummer, and I didn't like it. That's just my personal opinion, and sure, they had a lot to say, and that's fine, but that's not, I didn't feel closure, I didn't feel, you know, I got nothing from that story because of it. And like in contrast, like I really liked the characters. They were developed well, and they did a good job of introducing them and making them likable. So why would I want it to be a dark ending? Like, even if it's more realistic, it's kind of like if your friend goes off to follow his dreams to become a rock star. Is it realistic for him to make it big? Not really, but are you gonna hope he fails because that's more realistic? No, you're gonna hope, because you like him, you're gonna hope that he succeeds.
Right.
Like, that'll make you happy. Like,
yeah, and there are a lot of stories, you know, a lot of works of fiction that get you really invested in the characters and then completely, you know, rip your heart out of your chest in the end when everything is tragic, you know, everything fails miserably. Generally, you see those in movies or you read those in books. I feel like in video games, when that sort of thing happens, it's less acceptable because video game of those other mediums is the only one where you put in a lot of effort. You know, you're controlling the character, you feel even more like you're the character because you're actually controlling them with your actions.
You're in their shoes, as it were.
Yeah, so it's actually even more devastating if a video game has a tragic story.
Right, and you know, it's fine if that's what you're looking for, but in my opinion, that's, you know, I'm playing the game to have fun, and when I've invested all this time into these characters and I'm emotionally attached to them, I don't want to see them get shit on by life, essentially. And then there's also the message in this game. They're not particularly thought-provoking, although it can be considered that way, but I mean, most of the messages are pretty simple. In a world that's dark, there's still light, or you can't have darkness unless there's also light. That type of stuff, which is done before, and that's another thing that popular writers do these days. They try to make something unique and something that hasn't been done before, but when you take a message that's been done so many times, that makes the message universal and only makes it more meaningful. Like, there's nothing wrong with taking a powerful message that's been done before and using it to tell this completely new story.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely agree. Did you have more to add to that?
I think we're done.
Cool. Okay, so sounds like we both agree that the story was one of the enjoyable, unfortunately one of the few enjoyable aspects of this game. Well, to move along to another part of the game that I really liked, to go along with the 1920s urban American setting, the music is really jazzy. The soundtrack was composed by Nicholas Marquis, and he actually incorporated live jazz musicians, including the incredibly talented vocalist Laura Ellis, who sings the parts that, within the game's story, are being sung by one of the main characters, Kat. The soundtrack as a whole fits the setting of the game really well, and while not too many of the tracks are all that memorable, I definitely enjoyed what I heard while I was playing.
Yeah, I liked the music a lot. I actually thought they could have had more of it, because there's parts where you're just kind of walking around and there's nothing in the background.
Or just like really kind of like lower ambient tracks that aren't very loud.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I really did like the music and most of the voice acting too. However, there were some minor characters that had pretty bad voice acting.
Yeah, I think I actually kind of disagree with you a little bit there. At the very least, I thought that Johnny, the main character Dee Dee's father, I thought that his voice acting was kind of hit or miss. Some of the lines he said, I don't know what it was, but something about the way he said his lines kind of bugged me, almost like... Maybe it's the fact that I think his voice didn't go to his face very well, and you don't actually see the characters in the game because, like we mentioned earlier, you're a shadow, but you do get to see photos of them, which I thought was a really cool addition, because it's like, wait a minute, I don't recognize that at all, yet I've already been experiencing this character. Oh, that's right, there's no model for him, I haven't seen him. And I don't know, I felt like he just didn't sound like a very tough or suave dude. He kind of sounded like a goober, in my opinion, when he would talk and say things, but at the same time, he did still seem kind of like a 20. He was supposed to be like a 20s stylish, suit-wearing, like, go-getter. I don't know. There was just something off about it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because I thought Kat was kind of that way for me. Like, half of her, not half, but some of her lines just came out really disingenuous to me. Huh. But
yeah, so, on the other way around.
Yeah, interesting.
Cool. So, I guess this has been running a little bit longer than usual. We might as well just summarize our experiences with the game and then say whether or not it was worth it.
Yeah, so I think I, for the most part, have gone over my experience. I was utterly frustrated to the maximum extent by almost all of the puzzles, although as the story picks up later in the game, so do the puzzles. You get some more unique puzzles later in the game.
I mean, as a whole, the puzzles, I mean, on paper, you can recognize that they're great, even if, no matter what, the game's shoddy mechanics.
Yeah, unfortunately, the more complex the puzzle, the more susceptible it is to bugs.
You can appreciate the puzzle.
Yeah, exactly. And then I really enjoyed the story, but unfortunately, way too much time was spent redoing puzzles that were broken, and I can't say this game's worth it with how poorly it's polished.
Gotcha. Yeah, for me, this is a tough one. Like I mentioned earlier, this game was dressed the hell up in the form of a gorgeous, exciting trailer, some great demo footage at the gaming conventions, and for that reason, we were surprised when we saw the $15 price. And like I said, I really understand why a game that looked so high budget was given that low price. The entire experience is riddled with frustrating glitches, and the game itself is really short. As much as I enjoyed the story, the music, and the setting, it's really obvious that they needed to give this game a few more months of bug fixing, and in my opinion, it would have been nice to beef up the content a little bit too, like get it closer to a 6-hour length maybe. Act 2 you blow through in 30 minutes.
Yeah, and it was 4 hours with an hour worth of redoing stuff because of bugs.
Right, definitely. If they did that, if they fixed up some bugs, made it a little longer, they could easily charge upwards of $20 to $25 for the game, and it would still be worth it in my eyes to bump up the price, but actually give you, a solidly working game because of all of the other awesome parts of, the setting and the story. I mean, I think that they could have told a really fantastic story a lot better.
Yeah, I agree. With a good physics engine and tight mechanics, tight controls, it would have been a great game.
Yeah, I mean, even at higher price. But with the way it is now, it's hard to say if it's even worth $15. I mean, the current iteration of the game. I would say, unless it gets a patch anytime soon, it's currently not worth it.
I agree.
Okay.
So that's that on Contrast. So next week, we're going to be doing the game Risk of Rain.
Yeah. Gosh, we've already played a ton of that game, in the last couple days before we recorded this, so there's going to be a lot to say about that one.
Yep.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening.
Yep. Have a good night, everyone.
Take it easy.